Mars 2 Pro is the latest iteration in the series of Mars printers from ELEGOO. But is it any good? Let's find out. Now, the main feature of the Mars 2 Pro is its monochrome screen, so that's where we'll start. You see, unlike its predecessors, the Mars 2 Pro sports a 6-inch 2K monochrome LCD, which, unlike a regular LCD, is designed to let through more UV light. This, in a nutshell, reduces the amount of curing time required for each layer, which results in a much faster print time. How much faster? Well, that is an interesting question. You see, it's said to be 3 times faster. However, it's well worth pointing out that it's only actually quicker at printing each individual layer. The overall print time itself isn't actually 3 times faster. Let me explain. So if you look at Chitubox real quick, we can actually compare the default settings for all 3 printers. So here you can see that the default exposure time per layer on the Mars 2 Pro is set to 2 seconds. Compare that to the Mars Pro in 7 seconds and the regular Mars at 8 seconds, you can see that the Mars 2 Pro does actually print quite a bit faster. So that 3 times faster is looking pretty good so far. But how does that translate into actual print time? Well, I loaded up this file of the Eiffel Tower and I sliced it so we could compare those times. For the Mars 2 Pro, I was given a time of 5 hours and 1 minute. On the Mars Pro, I was given 8 hours and 23 minutes, and on the regular Mars, I was given 9 hours and 4 minutes. So as you can see, the overall print time isn't actually 3 times quicker, it is just the time it takes to print each individual layer. However, as I'm sure a lot of you know, there are quite a few variables when it comes to printing, and the main one is your resin. So my go-to resin at the moment is the water washable resin from ELEGOO. And during my exposure tests, I found out that the sort of optimum time for my resin is between 3 and 3.5 seconds. So that's a second to 1.5 seconds increase on my print time, which isn't really a big deal. But that does of course depend on how many layers you're printing. This Eiffel Tower, for example, increasing my print time from 2 seconds per layer to 3.2 seconds per layer actually added an extra 48 minutes to my print. Or so I thought. So I've been having this strange issue where the print time given does not match the actual print time taken. And I'm not the only one that spotted this because I've seen a few people mention it online. This Eiffel Tower, for example, the print time given for that at 3.2 seconds per layer was 5 hours and 49 minutes. The actual print time taken, however, was 6 hours and 57 minutes. That's an hour and 8 minutes difference. Now, I don't know if this is an issue with Chitubox or something else, but every print I've done so far has gone well over the print time given. Now, I know with faster curing resin, you can get your exposure times down to 1.5 to 2 seconds per layer, which will decrease your overall print time, but there still lies this sort of hidden mystery of going over the print time that's given to you. And like I said, I'm not sure what it is exactly. I mean, I know you have to take into consideration your lift height and lift speed between layers and so on. That is, by the way, why the overall printing isn't 3 times faster. It is just the layers. But there is still something not quite right there. I suspect it may be Chitubox not calculating things correctly, but I don't know. There is some kind of hidden, I don't know, error of time somewhere, but it is taking longer than it's reporting. Overall though, I will say that obviously the Mars 2 Pro definitely prints a lot faster than the Mars Pro and the Mars. So that is one huge bonus. The last thing I want to mention about time, by the way, is that because this has a monochrome screen, it is said to last longer than a regular LCD. Now obviously with these screens are considered a consumable and they do have a limited lifespan, but the monochrome screen is said to last 4 times longer. Hopefully that is accurate, but I guess time will find out. Speaking of usage, I wanted to talk about something that a lot of people have had concerns over, and that is the fact that it doesn't have a glass panel over the LCD. Now, I don't know if this is a design issue or if it's something to do with using monochrome screens, but it does leave the LCD quite exposed and it can scratch quite easily. Now, I have noticed that I've got a few hairline scratches on mine, but fortunately they're barely noticeable and they haven't affected my print or my lighting array or anything whatsoever. I did try and take a picture to show you, but I couldn't get them on camera. But like I said, there's only a few of them and they are very faint sort of hairline scratches. All I can say though is just to be extra careful around that screen, especially when it comes to zeroing your build plate and moving your resin tank, because the last thing you want to do is scratch this up. On a side note though, I don't know if this is actually an issue just for this printer, because looking at some videos online, if you check out some of the Anycubic videos, or even people unboxing Anycubic printers, the new mono printers that they've got coming out are set up in the same way. You can see that their screens are just sat on top with tape around the edge. So it does look like it might be a thing for monochrome printers, but again, I can't say for sure. The only other thing apart from it getting scratched that I'd be concerned about is if you say, for example, spill some resin on there. I don't know how that's going to affect, you know, making contact on the bare LCD, and also because it's held in with some tape around the edge, I kind of hope that the resin isn't going to seep through the tape, or that the tape is going to wear off from moving the resin tank. But that is definitely one to keep an eye out for and just to take extra care about. The final thing I wanted to mention about the screen is that it does have a new UV lighting array. The matrix array from the Mars Pro has gone, so you don't have to worry about any issues with any grid lines or anything like that affecting your print. It has completely changed. There is a new grid, a new UV array in there, which I imagine is part of using the monochrome system. But you do get a nice uniform light exposure across the whole screen, which is fantastic, obviously. Right, so with the screen out of the way, let's talk about some of the other features on the printer. The build plate on the Mars 2 Pro is slightly larger than both previous versions and comes with a sandblasted finish. An interesting change from the Mars Pro, by the way. The sandblasted finish is said to help with print adhesion and to help prevent print failures, much like the machine finish on the Mars Pro. And if I'm honest, I have found it a bit easier to remove my prints from this build plate compared to the previous one, so it does seem like they've listened to some feedback from the last time round. They've also changed the rotary knob on top of the build platform for a much more low profile one, which has actually increased the overall height in build volume, as the platform itself can actually move higher up the Z-axis, which is a nice little Brucey bonus. So far everything for my build platform has worked fine. I've had no issues. I've been using the default bottom exposure time of 35 seconds and yeah, it's been okay. I have noticed there is a slight sort of a resin staining when I've removed some stuff from the build platform. It's not caused any issues and it can be quite effectively removed by soaking in fresh IPA. I guess the best way to describe it is sort of like it's left a bit of a shadow behind. I thought it's worth noting, just in case you do get any kind of build up of resin on there, the texture of the sandblasted finish is actually still quite smooth. It's not particularly rough, so you shouldn't suffer from any build up of resin. But I thought it was worth noting. But like I said, it's not caused an issue and everything has been working fine with it so far. Zeroing the build plate is as easy as ever on these Mars printers. Very simple to do. I still haven't figured out why it rotates or if there's a function to it. I guess it might be a consequence of the design, but do bear in mind that you have to straighten the build plate up when you zero it. But apart from that, it's pretty simple and it's worked pretty well so far. So at the back of the printer is that carbon activated filter. Now the question is, does it actually make a difference? And to be honest with you, I think it does. You see, on a printer without one of these, all the fumes from the resin build up inside the lid and they're all out at once when you take it off, which is some pretty nasty stuff. With the filter, however, it does help to reduce that quite a bit. It doesn't eliminate it completely, but there's by far less of a smell when you take that lid off. Now, I don't know if the design has changed slightly on the Mars 2 Pro, but it does seem to work a hell of a lot better than the one I had on the Mars Pro. You see, for the brief time that I was using the Mars Pro, I could always smell a fairly strong smell of resin outside of the printer, which always made me wonder if it was actually working properly. On the Mars 2 Pro, that seems to have improved quite a bit. There is still a slight smell of resin outside of the printer, but I think that comes as a consequence of the filter extracting the fumes from the inside and the fans trying to keep everything cool when it comes to the UV and the LCD screen. Now, the carbon filter also works quite well in conjunction with that rubber seal that goes around the bottom of the lid, because it helps to create a vacuum inside just to get that filtration going. The only thing I will say about it is I'm not sure if you can actually change or replace that carbon filter. I haven't opened mine up to actually check, but from what I've seen online, it doesn't look like there is an easy or straightforward way to either replace the whole thing or just replace the carbon block inside. But aside from that, honestly, it does seem to help somewhat. But like I said, there is still a slight smell of resin outside of the printer. There is still a slight smell of resin when you take the lid off, as there will be because there's resin there. But overall, I feel like it has reduced the amount of fumes that you get from normal use. Talking about that rubber seal, it does seem to work quite nicely. At first it can be a little bit annoying, but I feel like once it's been on there for a while, it does get used to being in place. It can still pop off the sides from time to time, but you could always use a little bit of glue to help keep it down. I just would avoid using anything like super glue because you do run the risk of frosting up the plastic on the lid. The rubber seal also fits quite nice and snug down the side of the two arms that hold the resin tank in place, so it is fairly secure against any small knocks. The resin tank itself is of solid design, much like the previous one, and it does hold a nice amount of resin. In fact, I think it might actually be the same size as the previous ones, but don't quote me on that. It is easy to take in and out of the printer, but I do wish there was a slightly easier way to line it up, as there is a little bit of wiggle room on top. In fact, if you take a look at the Saturn printer that's coming out, you can see they've actually added a few bolts to the bottom of it just to help line it up and lock it into place. The whole thing also comes out in one, including the two arms that you use to hold the tank down. They sort of act as like handles to lift the entire lot out, which, to be honest with you, I think I prefer, especially when you look at this printer and you look at the fact that the LCD is quite open and can be scratched quite easily. It would be nice to be able to lift the whole thing up and out without having to slide it basically over the LCD. At the moment, I'm having to kind of hold it as high up as possible while sliding it under the two arms that hold it in place, and then trying to put it down straight onto the LCD, minimizing as much movement and contact as possible. One little addition I think it would be nice if ELEGOO could make was if they added those little measuring guides in the side of the tank. I am surprised they haven't added them yet, but to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure how many people actually use them compared to people who just pour the resin in, which I pretty much do anyway. But it would still be nice if there was a guide, just in case you wanted to be a little bit more precise when it comes to how much resin you're actually using. When it comes to the Z-axis, it is actually pretty quiet while in operation as it moves up and down that linear rail, and to be honest with you, I haven't had any issues there whatsoever. Speaking of sound though, the printer itself is actually quite loud. You see, as soon as you turn it on, the fans are kicking off like there's no tomorrow, and they're not the quietest. Now, I noticed a similar thing with the Mars Pro, and I think the same happens with the Mars. Now I have heard that there is some kind of like G-code file or something like that which you can use to change the behaviour of the printer so that the fans only turn on whilst you're actually printing, which would be quite nice. But I would urge on the side of caution when it comes to using some random files from the internet, but hopefully ELEGOO can point to something officially and say you can use this if you do wish to change the behaviour of the fans. Now when it comes to the Mars Pro and the Mars 2 Pro, the fans being on all the time isn't really a bad thing because it does help keep that filtration going, especially if you've got resin sat in a tank between prints. That was actually it. The touchscreen on the front of the printer also functions well. The screen itself is nice and responsive and the menus are very easy to navigate. They've also added a whole bunch of languages for you to choose from, and if you've seen my unboxing video you will have noticed that there is a slight mistake when it comes to English, but I'm sure that's something that can be fixed really easily with a little system update. The last thing I want to mention about the design of the printer is the position of the power switch and the USB port. The power switch is located at the back of the printer, which, while it's nice and out of the way, it can sometimes be a pain to reach the switch on and off, especially when you want to keep this thing switched off when not in use because of the noise of the fans. I feel like if they moved it to the side of the printer, or if they put one of those big beautiful on and off buttons on the front like you see on the Creality printers, that would be ideal. So if you're listening ELEGOO, please consider it next time. Thank you very much. The USB port on the front is great. It's not hidden at the back and it's not at the sides where it could get in the way of something like a washing cure, but I do have a slight criticism of it, and that's the position of the USB port on the front. See, I know it might sound a little bit nitpicky, but on the right hand side it does kind of fall underneath the build plate when you angle it to let your excess resin pour off. You see, when you're trying to quickly put it on top of that like drip accessory, it does fall in the firing line of the resin as you're sort of tilting it, and you don't really want to start getting resin spill all over your USB stick, potentially go in the USB port. So I feel like if they shifted it from the right hand side to the left, we could be onto a winner. The other thing I've noticed as well, by the way, is that the Mars 2 Pro seems to support USB 3.1s. I did buy a few of the low profile USBs a little while ago for my Mars Pro, but every time I plugged it in it would cause the screen to freeze, and if I had it plugged in before I turned it on, it would actually prevent the printer from turning on, which was quite annoying. Now I thought with the Mars 2 Pro I would plug it in and give it a go and see what would happen. Now everything seemed to function normally. The touchscreen worked, it didn't freeze, there was no explosions, there was no fire, it seemed to work okay. Now I haven't used a USB 3.1 to print yet because I'm not too sure how the printer will handle the the amount of power that a USB 3.1 would draw, because I know it draws a little bit more than other USB sticks. So for now I think I'll probably stick to either a regular USB or a USB 3.0. I do wish, however, that a lot of these printers started to introduce USB 3s on them, just because the data transfer when slicing files onto a USB stick would be much quicker, and I'm sure the printer reading it might read it a bit quicker if it had a USB 3.0. But yeah, like I said, it seems to work okay with the USB 3.1, but I haven't really fully experimented with it yet. And finally, you do get a nice little box of tools and accessories with the printer as standard, and if you want to see a little bit more on those, please feel free to check out my unboxing video. The one thing I will say is that the masks that came with the printer weren't exactly amazing, but I guess they're literally better than nothing. There was one little hidden gem in that box though that I did quite like, and that was the little pair of clippers that you get. You see, as somebody that does a little bit of modelling every now and again, I found them to actually be pretty good quality, and I'm sure I will get some extra use out of them. Now, with all of that out of the way, I'm sure it's time for the part that you've all been waiting for, and that is, how does this thing print? Well, I can honestly say that my experience so far has been pretty good. You see, I wanted to get a good amount of hours printing out of this before I put any kind of review together. So I decided to start off by printing all of the models provided on the USB stick. I took each model one by one, decided on the orientation I wanted to use, and then added the manual supports. Once I did that for all 8 of them, I then managed to cram all of them on the build plate together, and I printed them all in one go. Now, to be completely honest with you, I wasn't expecting this to work at all, because I wasn't sure that my support would not let me down. But to my surprise and my amazement, the whole thing worked. It printed all first time without any failures, which, like I said, I was just amazed that it worked. When I took a look at the models, however, I shouldn't really say however, but when I took a look at them, I was pretty impressed with what had come out. Now, I didn't expect them to be quite as nice as they are, but some of the detail on these guys is amazing. I mean, if you look at the wizard guy, for example, at the top of his coat he's got a load of feathers. You can even see some of the imprints sort of on the middle of those. You've got all the rivets and stuff all around a lot of the armor plates. There's a guy, I think it's the paladin, who's got runes down the front of his I keep saying shield, but down the front of his sword. You can see all of those. Just all sorts of detail. The faces are great, you know, the hands, literally everything. Even the lion looks amazing. So as someone who is used to seeing some crazy detail on miniatures and stuff, I was pretty damn impressed with these. The only problem, however, it's not so much of a problem, but then again it kind of is I've now seen what a 2K monochrome screen can do, and now I'm wondering what a 4K screen can do. So yeah, we'll have to see about that one. But yeah, these came out pretty well, and I was honestly amazed that it all actually worked. But yeah, they're pretty good. With those prints out of the way, I decided to try my hand at printing something else. So next up is this bust of the Red Skull. For this one, I decided to hollow him out. I picked my orientation, and I again added some manual supports. Now I did print 2 of these smaller ones, and I gave one of them to a friend of mine, and once again I was blown away by the results. Not only is this an amazing sculpt, the detail and quality that came out of the printer was absolutely amazing. So much so that I decided to print a much larger version straight after. Now, both of these did print first time again without any failures, which from the off is fantastic. However, you can see some of that anti-analyzing effect on the sides and also on the very last part of the head that was printed right at the top. Now, on the back of the jacket, you can also see some sort of horizontal lines going on. It's much more noticeable on the larger version, but they're not sort of horrific. Now, I'm not too sure what caused those lines exactly. It may be something to do with the fact that I hollowed it out and printed at a 30-degree angle, but I'm sure those lines can be ironed out with a slight tweak here and there. Aside from that, the detail on there was amazing. You know, everything around the face, the skull, the teeth, the eyes, literally even the detail on the jacket was actually quite mind-blowing for this. It came out so well. I was a bit lost for words with this one, but what a sculpt, what a print. So with those 2 out of the way, I decided I really wanted to print another bust, but this time around I thought I'd go for one that the Emperor himself would approve of. So I decided to go for this Death Corpse of Krieg bust. So once again, I chose my orientation and I added my manual supports, and once again I was greeted by a first time print. And yes, I swear to God, I'm not making this up. Somehow, if it's a miracle or what, I don't know, but everything so far has printed first time. It's been pretty good. Now I will point out that on his left arm and the back of his helmet there was a slight misprint. You can see there's a slight hiccup with some of the layers, but I think I missed a few supports here and there. But overall, the quality on the rest of the model was pretty damn good. And one of the reasons why I went for this one was also that it had a mixture of lots of different surfaces. There's lots of smooth, there's lots of sharp surfaces, there's also some texture here and there. So I thought it'd kind of be a good test as well as just being a very nice thing to print. Now, I will no doubt try and print this again to fix the issues I had before I get branded a filthy heretic. So I will get on that as soon as possible. I swear, please don't send the Inquisition to pay me a visit. Yeah. Right, so as I was getting everything ready for the review, ELEGOO put out a video where they compared two prints of the Eiffel Tower. So I decided to print one of those as well. You see, I wanted to print one for myself so I could see how good the quality actually was. Now, I don't know what the exact file was that they printed, but I think the one I found was pretty spot on. And yes, this is the one that I showed earlier on in the video. Now, I decided to print this as it is, standing up straight directly on the build plate. I did put a handful of supports going through the middle and under the arches, but I don't think they were really needed. I was a little bit worried about this one, mainly because of the small handrails that go around the middle and the little point at the top, and that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to print this. After seeing the handrails in their video, I thought there's no way you're going to pull that one off. But to my surprise, everything came out fine, and yes, you may have guessed it right, it printed first time, no issues, and I swear that did happen. I'm not trying to blag it, alright? It actually happened. Now, the handrails along the outside were perfect, and to be honest, I have no idea how they actually printed. The bars themselves are so thin, I don't know how they didn't get pulled off as the resin was yanked off of the fet plate after each layer. The rails along the inside, however, did suffer from a little bit of warping and weren't exactly straight, but it's as if the main rail that goes over the top was slightly too long for some reason, so I'm not really sure what happened there. Speaking of warping, some of the larger cross sections at the bottom were also a little bit out of shape, but they do seem to have fixed themselves after they were cured. But the rest of the model looks fantastic, the detail is insane. Again, I don't know how some of it actually printed and didn't get pulled off between its layers. Everything else was just so precise and well done, and when you actually look at this model throughout the sort of legs and the shape of it, there's just tons of little cross sections that, again, I don't even know how I printed it. So I definitely recommend printing one of these for yourself just to check out how good it is. Now, I did of course also print those rook towers that come on the USB stick. They were actually the very first thing that I printed, which you can see at the end of my unboxing and setup video. Now, much like everything else, these came out nicely. There was a slight misprint near the tops, but it was nothing major, and the rest of it actually looked pretty immaculate. Now, I'm not going to bother telling you that these printed fine first time with no issues, because I've had enough of saying it now. But the rook towers were printed at 2 seconds per layer as they are set up in the test file. I just printed that straight from the USB stick as it is. I didn't alter it or create my own. And everything else in this video was printed after I tuned in my resin. So they were all done at 3.2 seconds per layer, apart from the My Manufactory models, which I showed you at the very beginning. Those are actually done at 3.5 seconds per layer, because I typed it in by mistake and didn't realise. So yeah, that's it for my prints. As you can see, everything's gone pretty swimmingly, and yeah, hopefully everything from now on will be just as good. Right, so that is everything. Would I recommend this printer? Definitely. Would I recommend it over the Mars and the Mars Pro? Definitely. The design is nice, the printing is nice, the Monochrome LCD is a nice upgrade over the Mars and Mars Pro, and to be honest, I would go for the Mars 2 Pro purely for that speed increase alone. In fact, the Mars 2 Pro actually has a lower resolution than the Mars Pro, but that's due to the slightly larger size of the Monochrome LCD. But to be honest, the difference is so little, I don't think you would even notice it, especially due to the fact that these are both printing, well, all three of them are printing at 2K anyway. But I would say this one is the hands down winner out of three, easily. Do a quick recap to wrap things up before we end the video. Now, what are things that I like? Well, the printer itself is really easy to set up and use. It's got good build quality. It's got that 2K monochrome screen for the faster printing. The printing itself is pretty damn good. The build plate works well and is really easy to level. The build platform is pretty quiet as it goes up and down. And the carbon filter does do a pretty good job at reducing the amount of fumes you get. What are the things that I don't like? Well, the printer is quite loud. See, the fans are quite noisy and they are on all the time. The screen has no protection over it this time round, so it doesn't have that tempered glass like the last printers. And it leaves it quite easy and open to being scratched. It also just has just a little bit of black tape going around the edges. Despite the carbon filter, you do still get a slight smell of resin outside of the printer. And I'm not sure if that carbon filter can be replaced. But the main thing, and this is my main gripe so far, I'm not sure if it is a thing with the printer, as I said earlier, but the main thing that bugs me is the fact that the print time is longer than the print time you're given. And I've had it, like I said earlier, up to an hour, sometimes over an hour longer, and that is really the main thing that bugs me. But that could just be a little issue with Chitubox, I don't know. What are things that I would change? Well, I would definitely consider moving the power switch or putting a nice power button on the front. The USB port, I would move that from the right hand side to the left hand side. The resin tank, I would love to see a change in design, so it's basically the same as on the Saturn, also with some measuring guides at the back. Also, just a nice easy way just to straighten that build plate. You know, the build plate is nice and easy to level, but just a nice little thing to straighten it would be good. Some kind of like guides or whatever would be handy. The final thing I want to mention, it's not so much something I would change with the printer as it is now, but I think it would have been nice if it came with a 4K screen. You see, I feel like ELEGOO may have missed an opportunity by not putting a 4K screen on here, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this as well. You see, if it had a 4K screen, I kind of feel like it would be sort of like a little brother to the Saturn, and it would also be slightly more affordable as well. And I think it would give ELEGOO a printer of this size in the market with a 4K screen. It would also, if it had a 4K screen, be a bigger difference between the Mars Pro and this one. You know, the monochrome screen is very good, and that alone is why I would recommend going for this over a Mars Pro or a Mars. But I feel like the difference isn't, you know, massive. It's not that significant for everybody. But I feel like if it had a 4K screen in, it would be a huge difference between them. And like I said, it would give ELEGOO a printer of this size with a 4K screen. I mean, they could have something coming out in the future, who knows. But yeah, I feel like it might be a slightly missed opportunity, especially when you got something like the Frozen Mini 4K sort of on the horizon. I don't know if that's going to be, you know, slightly bigger than the Mars 2 Pro. I'm pretty sure it's going to be slightly more expensive, and I know putting a 4K screen in this would probably increase the cost. But I feel like, you know, you've had the Mars with the 2K screen, you've had the Mars Pro with the 2K screen, and I almost felt like the next step for the Mars 2 was to put a 4K screen in there. But so far, I mean at the moment anyway, the jump has been the monochrome. But yeah, I feel like, you know, maybe next time we'll see the 4K on something like this. But until then, we'll have to wait and see. Okay, so that is my review. Now, I hope you found some of the information in here useful. If you do have any questions or anything like that, please do leave a comment and I will get back to you. One thing I will say is that this has been based purely and honestly on my experience so far. So if you are thinking about buying one of these, please do check out a whole bunch of reviews, because I know not everybody's going to have the same experience. And after all, it is good to take in other people's thoughts and opinions on stuff, especially when it comes to forking out your money. So thank you very much for watching. Any feedback is much appreciated, and if you do end up going for one of these, I hope it works out well for you and I hope you have a good time printing. And until next time, take it easy, and I'll see you then.